Last Saturday morning, somewhere in a quiet American suburb, a retired school teacher spent 40 minutes raking grass clippings off her lawn. She stuffed them into 3 heavy black bags, dragged them to the curb, and wiped the sweat from her forehead. 2 hours later, she drove to the garden center. She spent $27 on a bag of fertilizer. The label promised fast, green results. The main ingredients? Nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. The exact same nutrients sitting in those black bags the garbage truck had already hauled away. That scene plays out across millions of yards every single weekend, and it raises a question nobody in the gardening industry particularly wants you to ask. Why are so many experienced gardeners paying good money to replace what they just threw in the trash? Here's the number that puts this in perspective. The global synthetic fertilizer market is valued at over $200 billion a year. The average homeowner spends $50 to $100 annually just keeping the lawn green, and a significant chunk of that money is buying back nutrients that were freely available in the yard waste bin, the kitchen compost, and the pile of pulled weeds sitting by the back fence. The answer to how this happened involves a century-old chemistry experiment originally designed to build bombs, and a simple truth that ancient farmers understood 4,000 years before any of us were born. The soil already knows how to feed itself if you stop starving it. Everything covered in this video costs nothing. Zero. Not a single trip to the store. Just grass, kitchen scraps, a bucket, and a little patience. By the end, the relationship between your garden and your trash can will never look the same again. Here is a detail that rarely appears in modern gardening advice. The longest-running agricultural success story in human history did not rely on a single bag of commercial fertilizer. Not one. More than 4,000 years ago, in the monsoon-soaked river valleys of ancient China, rice farmers discovered something remarkably elegant. After the heavy rains passed, they would cut the tall grasses growing along the muddy edges of their paddies and lay those cuttings directly between the rows of young rice. No machinery, no formulas, just a crescent-shaped blade and a sharp pair of eyes. They called this practice green manure, and it worked so well that those same fields, the very same patches of earth, kept producing harvests for 40 unbroken centuries without ever going barren. In the early 1900s, an American soil scientist named Franklin Hiram King traveled across China, Korea, and Japan trying to understand how that was even possible. What he documented was staggering. Entire civilizations feeding an average of 3 people per acre of farmland, year after year, generation after generation, by treating every scrap of organic material as something sacred. Nothing left the cycle. Grass clippings, food waste, animal manure, canal mud, all of it went back into the ground. King noted that Western agriculture had a dangerous habit of sweeping its fertility into rivers and out to sea, squandering in a few decades what had taken centuries to accumulate. The Eastern farmers he studied made no such mistake. Every ounce of organic matter was currency, and they spent it wisely. And this was not just an Eastern tradition. Halfway around the world, Roman farmers were doing nearly the same thing. Agricultural writers like Columella urged landowners to gather organic matter from anywhere they could find it, roadsides, stables, even laundry water, and return it to the fields. The Romans valued organic byproducts so highly that Emperor Vespasian placed a tax on the collection of human urine, which was used both as fertilizer and in industrial cleaning. When critics mocked the idea of taxing urine, Vespasian reportedly held up a gold coin and said the equivalent of, "Money does not stink." That phrase survived in Latin for 2,000 years. The principle behind all of it was beautifully simple. What comes from the earth goes back to the earth. Every leaf, every blade of grass, every kitchen scrap, it all belongs in a loop. So what happened? How did millions of gardeners end up breaking that loop and paying a corporation to close it for them? The answer starts with a chemistry lab in Germany and a world war. In 1913, 2 German chemists named Fritz Haber and Karl Bosch solved one of the great puzzles of industrial chemistry. They figured out how to pull nitrogen directly out of the air and fix it into a solid compound. The original purpose had nothing to do with gardens. That nitrogen was destined for explosives. The Haber-Bosch process fueled the German munitions effort during World War I. But wars end. Factories do not always close. When the fighting stopped, those enormous production plants needed a new product to sell. The pivot was remarkably smooth. Ammunition chemistry became fertilizer chemistry almost overnight, and a brand new consumer industry was born. By the 1950s, synthetic fertilizers had become a household staple. The marketing was effective because it spoke directly to convenience. Why wait months for a compost pile to do its slow, quiet work when a quick shake of green powder could deliver visible results in a week? It was a fair question. The products did produce fast, bright growth. What the marketing left out was the long-term cost. Decades of research have now shown that heavy, sustained use of synthetic nitrogen disrupts the living community inside the soil. Think of it this way. Healthy soil is not just dirt, it is a crowded neighborhood of bacteria, fungi, earthworms, and microscopic organisms all working together to break down organic matter and deliver nutrients to plant roots. Synthetic fertilizer bypasses that neighborhood entirely. It feeds the plant directly, like an IV drip, while the living soil underneath slowly goes quiet. Over years, water retention drops, soil structure degrades, the garden becomes dependent on the next bag and the next one after that. It is not unlike a person who replaces home-cooked meals entirely with supplements. The body still gets calories, but something essential is lost in the process. Nobody had to ban compost or outlaw grass clippings. The old methods simply drifted out of daily habit once a faster option appeared on the shelf. It was not a conspiracy. It was just economics and convenience doing what they always do. But the biology never disappeared. The earthworms are still down there. The bacteria are still waiting. The cycle just needs a reason to wake up. And the fastest way to wake it up might already be sitting in a pile on your lawn. In part 2, here is something most gardening books gloss over. Fresh grass clippings are not just green waste. Laboratory analysis shows they contain roughly 4% nitrogen, along with meaningful amounts of phosphorus and potassium. The same three nutrients printed on every commercial fertilizer bag. When soil microbes break those clippings down, they release those nutrients directly into the root zone in a form plants absorb naturally. That is free fertilizer sitting on the lawn every single week. But there is a way to concentrate that power dramatically, and it comes straight from a technique documented in agricultural texts going back 2,000 years. Gardeners call it fertilizer tea. The method is simple, the results are potent, and the only investment is a bucket and about 2 weeks of patience. Here is how it works. The next time the lawn gets mowed or a patch of weeds gets pulled, especially deep-rooted weeds like dandelions, stinging nettle, or comfrey, those greens should not go into the waste bin. Dandelion roots reach deep enough to draw up calcium and potassium from soil layers that shallow-rooted plants never touch. Stinging nettle carries iron, phosphorus, zinc, and magnesium. These are not nuisance plants. They are mineral miners. Chop the greens roughly to speed up breakdown. Fill a large bucket or plastic bin about halfway to 2-3 full. Then cover the greens completely with water. Rainwater is the best choice here because the chlorine in municipal tap water can slow down the fermentation process. Cover the top loosely. A piece of screen or cheesecloth works to keep mosquitoes out while still letting the mixture breathe. Now let it steep. 10 to 14 days, stir it every couple of days to keep oxygen moving through the liquid. Fair warning, as the days pass, this brew will develop a smell that could clear a patio. That pungent, swampy odor is actually a good sign. It means the fermentation is active and the nutrients are being pulled into the water. When the liquid turns dark and the foaming stops, it is ready. This concentrated tea needs to be diluted before it touches any plant. 1 part tea to 10 parts fresh water. Pour the diluted mixture around the base of tomatoes, peppers, squash, flowers, anything that is actively growing. For a mid-season boost, it can also be sprayed directly on leaves. Plant foliage absorbs dissolved nutrients surprisingly fast, so a foliar spray delivers a visible pickup within days. Deeper green color, stronger stems, faster fruit set. A single batch of this tea made from 1 bucket of lawn clippings can feed a mid-sized vegetable garden for a full week. The leftover solids, the soggy mush at the bottom of the bucket, still have value. Spread them around the base of shrubs or worked into a compost pile. They continue releasing nutrients for weeks. Nothing goes to waste. The loop stays closed. One critical warning before moving on. If the lawn has been treated with chemical herbicides, particularly persistent weed and feed products containing compounds like aminopyrrolide or picloram, those clippings should never go into vegetable garden tea. These engineered chemicals survive composting and fermentation intact. They will damage broadleaf crops like tomatoes and beans severely. A chemically treated lawn needs several untreated seasons before its clippings are safe for food gardens. But a lawn that has been kept natural, that lawn is a weekly supply of free high-quality plant food just waiting to be brewed. And grass is only the beginning. Some of the most effective soil remedies are hiding in a place most people walk past 20 times a day without thinking about it. Every kitchen produces a quiet stream of biological material that almost always ends up in the garbage or down the drain. Eggshells, banana peels, rice water, coffee grounds. Individually, they seem like nothing. Together, they form a surprisingly complete toolkit for feeding soil and solving specific garden problems without spending a cent. Start with rice water because this one surprises almost everyone. When rice gets rinsed before cooking, the cloudy runoff water carries dissolved starches that act as a powerful attractant for beneficial soil bacteria, particularly a group called lactobacillus. Save that rinse water. Let it sit at room temperature for 2 to 3 days until it develops a slightly sour smell. That sourness means the beneficial microbes have multiplied. Pouring this fermented rice water around the base of plants delivers a concentrated dose of the exact bacteria that helps suppress soil-borne pathogens and improve nutrient uptake. Think of it as a probiotic treatment for the ground itself. The method costs nothing, just the water that was headed for the drain anyway, and takes almost no effort beyond remembering to set the bowl aside instead of tipping it into the sink. Now consider the banana peel. When tomato and pepper plants begin setting flowers and forming buds, their demand for potassium spikes sharply. Potassium drives blooming, fruit development, and overall plant resilience. Burying a whole banana peel in the soil works, eventually, but it takes months to decompose. There is a faster path. Chop leftover banana peels into small pieces, drop them into a jar of water, and add a spoonful of brown sugar or molasses. Let the jar sit for 3 to 4 days. The sugar triggers a rapid microbial reaction that pulls the potassium out of the peel and suspends it in the liquid far faster than simple burial ever could. Diluted and poured around fruiting plants, this mixture delivers a potassium surge right when the plant needs it most. Then there is the eggshell, one of the most underrated scraps in any kitchen. Anyone who has ever grown tomatoes knows the heartbreak of blossom and rot. A beautiful fruit develops perfectly on top, only to reveal a black, sunken, rotten patch on the bottom when it gets picked. That damage is caused by a calcium shortage in the plant tissue, and it does not just affect tomatoes. Peppers, squash, and melons are vulnerable too. Eggshells are more than 90% calcium carbonate. Crushing them finely and working them into the soil adds a slow-release calcium source that builds up over time. For a faster rescue in the middle of the season, boil crushed shells in water for 10 minutes to make a calcium-rich liquid. Combine that liquid with a splash of leftover milk, another concentrated calcium source, and a small amount of molasses. The sugar in the molasses feeds the specific soil bacteria that help transport calcium into root systems efficiently. No commercial calcium spray matches the completeness of that combination. Finally, a quiet trick for transplant day. When a young seedling gets moved from a sheltered pot into open ground, the shock of new soil, new temperature, and new exposure can stall its growth for weeks. Ordinary baker's yeast offers a surprisingly effective remedy. A teaspoon of dry yeast dissolved in warm water with a pinch of sugar produces natural growth-promoting compounds. Poured around the base of a newly transplanted seedling, it encourages root expansion and helps the plant establish itself faster. It is the cheapest transplant insurance available, and it has been sitting in kitchen cupboards for generations. 4 scraps, 4 solutions, all free. But what if there were a way to automate the whole process? To build a system that turns kitchen waste into finished fertilizer without lifting a pitchfork or turning a heavy pile. Traditional composting asks a lot of the gardener, hauling material to a pile, turning it regularly with a fork, monitoring moisture, balancing ratios. For anyone with a sore back or stiff knees, that routine gets old fast. There is a simpler method, and it works by letting biology do the heavy lifting instead of the gardener. Take an ordinary plastic storage bin or a wooden crate, cut the bottom off completely, find a spot in the garden where the soil could use improvement, and set the bottomless container directly on the bare ground, pressing it in a couple of inches so it stays stable. That open bottom is the key to the entire system. It creates a direct highway between the food scraps inside and the earthworms and microbes already living in the soil below. Start filling the bin with kitchen scraps, vegetable peels, crushed eggshells, banana skins, melon rinds. Add coffee grounds generously. They contribute a slight acidity that helps unlock phosphorus already trapped in the surrounding soil, and their gritty texture prevents clay soils from compacting into hard slabs. No turning required, no schedule to follow. The decomposing material draws earthworms upward from the surrounding garden soil. They enter through the open bottom, feed on the scraps, and tunnel back out into the garden beds, distributing nutrients and aerating the ground as they travel. Their castings, what they leave behind, are among the most nutrient-balanced natural fertilizers on the planet. What happens inside that bin over the first 30 days is quietly remarkable. During the first week, soil bacteria colonize the fresh scraps and begin multiplying rapidly. Their metabolic activity actually raises the temperature of the material, a miniature fever that accelerates decomposition. By the second week, white threads of fungal mycelium begin weaving through the pile, forming an underground network that connects nearby plant roots to moisture and mineral sources they could not reach on their own. By week 3, the earthworm population peaks. They aerate, they digest, they distribute. And by day 30, the original scraps have vanished entirely, replaced by a layer of dark, cool, crumbly earth that smells exactly like a forest floor after a spring rain. No factory produced it, no store sold it. The garden built it from what was about to be thrown away. One bin can service a small to mid-sized garden. Larger yards can run 2 or 3 at once, rotating them through different beds each season. When one bin fills up and finishes its cycle, lift it off. The rich soil stays behind, right where the plants need it, and move the empty frame to the next patch that needs attention. Over 2 or 3 seasons, every corner of the garden gets a deep feeding without a single bag of store-bought amendment. And for gardeners who want even less effort than that, there is one more approach that asks for almost nothing at all. Here is a mistake that even experienced gardeners make for years before someone finally tells them to stop. Bagging grass clippings. The practice is so deeply ingrained that it feels like the right thing to do. Tidy lawn, clean edges, bags at the curb. But turf research has consistently shown that leaving clippings right where they fall after mowing, a practice called grass cycling, returns enough nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium to the root zone to reduce the need for applied fertilizer by up to 50%. The clippings filter down to the soil surface within a day or two, decompose quickly, shade the roots from summer heat, and slow moisture evaporation. The lawn feeds itself. In vegetable beds, a thin layer of dried grass clippings spread around the base of pepper plants. Onions and tomatoes serves as a weed-suppressing, moisture-retaining mulch that breaks down slowly over the growing season, delivering a gentle, steady trickle of nutrition as it goes. It also protects sloping ground from erosion and keeps the pounding force of heavy rain from compacting exposed topsoil into a hard crust. One rule: make sure the clippings have not gone to seed, or the mulch layer will sprout a new crop of weeds instead of suppressing them. Wood shavings and sawdust deserve a mention here too, but they come with a catch that trips up a lot of gardeners. Raw wood is extremely high in carbon, sometimes a 100.1 ratio of carbon to nitrogen. If sawdust gets mixed directly into garden soil, the microbes that break it down will consume every available bit of nitrogen in the surrounding ground to fuel the decomposition. The plants starve, leaves turn yellow, growth stalls. Experienced gardeners call this nitrogen tie-up, and it is one of the most common and most misunderstood mistakes in home composting. The fix is straightforward. High carbon materials like sawdust need to be balanced with high nitrogen materials before they go into the garden. Fresh green grass clippings work well, so does chicken manure. Even diluted human urine, which sounds surprising but is a sterile nitrogen-rich liquid that farmers have used for centuries, accelerates the composting of woody material effectively. Balancing the carbon with nitrogen produces a dark, crumbly, loam-like compost that builds lasting soil structure. The pattern across all of these methods is the same. Less buying, less hauling, less complication, more trusting the biology that has been running beneath the surface for thousands of years. The gardener who learns to see kitchen scraps as ingredients and lawn clippings as currency has already stepped outside the system that depends on selling solutions to problems nature solved a long time ago. Every garden produces what it needs to feed itself. That has always been true. The grass clippings on the lawn, the eggshells in the sink, the weeds along the fence, none of it is waste. It never was. It is raw material waiting to re-enter the cycle it came from. A $200 billion industry grew up around convincing gardeners they needed to buy that cycle back in a bag. But the soil does not read labels. It does not care about brands. It responds to organic matter, to moisture, to the slow, patient work of microbes and earthworms, the same forces that kept fields fertile for 4,000 years before anyone invented a fertilizer factory. There is a quiet satisfaction in watching a garden thrive on what the household was about to discard. No receipt, no trip to the store, no chemical smell on the hands afterward, just the steady proof that the oldest system in agriculture still works, and that it was never really lost, only set aside for a while. Tonight after dinner, the rice water does not have to go down the drain. The banana peel does not have to go in the trash. The coffee grounds do not have to end up in a landfill. They can go outside into the garden, back where they belong. Nature does not need a product, it just needs a partner. If this story changed the way you look at the organic waste in your home and garden, please subscribe and like the channel. We are uncovering the natural wisdom that modern industry has tried to replace. Let's cultivate a sustainable future together. The next secret to a thriving garden will be shared soon.